It's 2 a.m. The room is dark. Everyone else is asleep. But you're lying there, staring at the ceiling, replaying a conversation from 3 days ago. Word by word, tone by tone. You're analyzing the exact moment you said something, and wondering if the other person took it wrong, if they're upset, if you accidentally revealed too much or not enough, if you came across as weird or cold or too eager. Nobody brought it up. Nobody reacted strangely. Logically, you know it's probably fine, but your mind won't let it go. And the worst part? This isn't new. This is just Tuesday. There's a version of you that desperately wants to turn the thoughts off, to just rest, to exist in a moment without immediately dissecting it. But every time you try, the mind pulls you back in, quieter, more insistent, like it has something urgent to show you, even when there's nothing there. Here's what I want you to understand before anything else. This isn't a personality flaw. It isn't anxiety in the clinical sense, though it can sit close to it. It isn't weakness, or insecurity, or self-absorption. There's actually a reason your brain works this way, and once you understand it, really understand it, you'll stop fighting yourself quite so hard. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside the mind of someone who overthinks everything. The first thing you need to know is that your brain doesn't separate the past from the present the way other people's brains seem to. For most people, a conversation ends and then it ends. It closes. They move on, not because they're shallow, but because their minds naturally release things once the moment passes. Your mind doesn't do that. For you, a moment that's technically over can feel just as alive 3 days later as it did when it happened. You can re-enter it, re-feel it. You notice details that most people never registered. The pause before someone answered, the shift in their energy, the thing they didn't say. Psychologists have a name for the system responsible for this. It's called the default mode network, the part of your brain that activates when you're not focused on a task. In most people, it idles. It daydreams softly. It rests. In overthinkers, the default mode network is almost hyperactive. It doesn't idle. It generates. It keeps producing scenarios, possibilities, connections, replays. It treats the absence of a problem as an invitation to search for one. This isn't a malfunction. It's a brain that evolved to be vigilant, deeply, relentlessly vigilant. The question is just, vigilant about what? Here's something that doesn't get said enough. Overthinkers are almost always the most perceptive people in the room. You notice things. Not in a proud way. It's not a choice. You walk into a space and register the emotional temperature before anyone's spoken a word. You sense when something is slightly off, in a relationship, in a dynamic in yourself. You pick up on subtext, on contradiction, on the gap between what someone says and what they actually mean. This is not overthinking. This is depth of perception. The problem arises when that perceptive system has no off switch, when it applies the same intensity to a mundane Monday as it does to something that genuinely matters, when it can't distinguish between a real signal and background noise, and so it treats everything as signal. You don't overthink because you're weak. You overthink because your awareness dial is permanently turned up, and for a long time no one taught you how to live with a mind like that. There's a pattern that almost every overthinker shares, and it goes like this. Something happens. Something small, and your brain immediately generates a series of possible meanings. Not one meaning, several, simultaneously, and then it begins to evaluate each one, searching for which interpretation is most likely, most dangerous, most important. And while it's doing that, it generates more possibilities, and evaluates those too. Psychologists call this rumination. But that word makes it sound like a habit, like something you're choosing to do. It isn't. It feels more like weather than like a decision, like something that moves through you rather than something you initiate. What's actually happening is a kind of cognitive loop. Your brain keeps cycling through a problem because it hasn't reached resolution. It's looking for certainty in situations that are inherently uncertain. And since certainty rarely arrives, the loop continues. Here's the reframe. The reason you can't stop thinking isn't that you're obsessive. It's that your mind was built for problems that have answers. It's a problem-solving system running on problems that don't resolve. Because most human situations don't resolve. People are ambiguous. Emotions are complex. Relationships don't come with confirmation receipts. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It just wasn't designed for this particular landscape. Something else that lives at the center of the overthinker's world. And this one is quieter, harder to name. You hold yourself to a standard that you would never apply to another person. If a friend told you they said something slightly awkward at a party, you'd laugh with them, tell them no one noticed, move on. If you said the same thing, you'd be awake at 2 a.m. reconstructing it. This isn't hypocrisy. It comes from something deeper, a fundamental belief, usually formed early and quietly, that you are somehow more responsible for how things go, that your errors carry more weight, that if something goes wrong, it probably had something to do with you. Psychologists sometimes call this a heightened internal locus of control, the unconscious conviction that you are the primary variable in most situations. It sounds like arrogance from the outside. It feels like burden from the inside. You don't think you're better than others. You think you're more accountable than others. And that weight never fully lifts. The loneliness of overthinking is real, and it rarely gets acknowledged. Not loneliness in the social sense. Overthinkers often have deep, meaningful relationships. But there's a specific kind of isolation that comes from having a mind that works differently, from sitting in a group of people having a simple conversation, and feeling like you're 3 layers beneath the surface while everyone else is floating. From watching people make decisions easily, quickly, and not understanding how they do that, how they just choose, how they just move on, how they don't seem to carry the weight of every possible outcome like a coat they can never take off. You've probably been told to think less, to just relax, to stop worrying about things you can't control. And you probably smiled and nodded and thought, if only it were that simple, if only thinking less were a thing you should simply decide to do. Here's what those people don't understand. For an overthinker, thinking is not the problem. Thinking is the mechanism. It's the language your mind speaks. Asking you to stop overthinking is like asking someone to stop breathing deeply. You can try briefly, but the body will always return to what it knows. The goal was never to think less. The goal is to think with less suffering attached to it, and that's a completely different thing. There is a gift buried in all of this, and I don't say that to be optimistic. I say it because it's structurally true. The same mind that replays conversations is also the mind that notices nuance in people that others miss entirely. The same mind that imagines worst-case scenarios is also the mind that plans more carefully, prepares more thoroughly, considers more angles. The same mind that struggles to let go is also the mind that loves more deeply, cares more completely, and stays present in relationships long after others have drifted. Overthinkers make extraordinary writers, therapists, strategists, artists, friends, not because they suffer, but because they feel the texture of things more acutely than most. Your depth is not a disorder. It was never a disorder. It was always a different architecture. The only problem was that you grew up in a world that rewarded people who moved fast, decided quickly, and didn't look too closely at things, and you, who moves more slowly, who looks too closely at everything, who feels the weight of what others brush past. You were told in 100 small ways that something was wrong with you. There wasn't. There still isn't. There is something I want to leave you with. Not advice, not a system, not 5 steps to a quieter mind. Just this, the fact that you think so deeply about your impact on other people means you care. The fact that you replay conversations means you value connection enough to examine it. The fact that you can't simply let things go means you're invested in the truth of things, in understanding them correctly, fully honestly. That is not a flaw with a solution. That is a person with a conscience and a depth of awareness that most people will spend their whole lives trying to develop. You don't need to be fixed. You never needed to be fixed. You needed someone to finally explain to you how your mind actually works, and to tell you that it's one of the most remarkable kinds of minds there is. Maybe that's what tonight was for.